Thank you.
Okay, take it if you
want.
want.
This table is already, I'm going to have to just get my stuff ready here.
Yeah.
Oh, and I have to connect this.
Yes. And it works.
And let's see if I'm going to get my notes. OK. OK, so thank you for that introduction, and thank you, React Paris, for having me here. I'm excited to be speaking today to tell you about enhancing your forms with React Server Components. So the session is going to include mostly live coding with the goal of teaching you how to work with forms and RCs in practice. So I was just introduced, but my name is Aurora. I'm from Norway, work as a consultant, and I'm actually using React Server Components in my current consultancy project. So let's just begin by looking at the typical React single-page application. It's great. You have your React query, your React hook form, all is well. However, client-side apps have their problems. They run purely with JavaScript, and the entire application is constructed from JavaScript after the user opens the URL. When working with, for example, from a slow device or with a slow connection, it can take a really long time to download and execute this JavaScript to even load the page to fill out a simple form. In addition, to submit data to a database safely, you would need a backend where you would also want to validate your data, because relying only on client-side validation isn't enough. And even with a framework like Next.js, you might still experience issues. Even though you fix your problem of blank screens by pre-rendering the pages, you now have an even bigger dependency waterfall of server-side rendering the page, downloading, parsing, and executing the JavaScript, and then hydrating the entire page before anything really works. And let's not forget the struggles of working with forms in the Next.js pages router. You had to manually create your own API endpoints every time you wanted to safely submit a form to the server. You would want to use a library like TRCP to ensure type safety. You might have to write a bunch of excess, messy code, especially to handle errors and loading states. Overall, it was not a good developer experience. So React Server Components, React Components rendered on the server, will let us fetch data asynchronously inside components and access all our backend resources. They can reduce the bundle size by minimizing JavaScript sent to the client, and let us build performant apps while maintaining an enjoyable developer experience. Of course, we also want to build apps that are accessible not only on a good computer or with fast internet. We can do this by making our apps progressively enhanced. Progressive enhancement is a strategy that puts emphasis on web content first, allowing everyone to access the basic functionality of a page, while users with additional browser features or faster internet receive an enhanced version instead. So this phrase emerged during a time of varied CSS and JavaScript support, with many users actually browsing the web with JavaScript disabled. Today, we are fortunate to develop for a much more consistent web. However, following these core principles still will lead to fast and resilient apps. And while it's easy to think that only 5% of your users have slow connections, the reality is that 100% of your users have slow connections 5% of the time. And everyone has JavaScript disabled until it's loaded. So what we want to do is use React Server Components to write performant, progressively enhanced, user-friendly forms without a lot of front-end complexity. We're going to need a framework to use RCs inside, and Next.js is our pick here. Then we will be using use transition from React 18, which I don't need to explain anymore. Thank you, Tejas. Then we will be needing multiple React canary features that are actually already available in the Next.js app router, recently announced to be released with React 19. Server actions, the form component, use form state, use form status, and use optimistic. Use transition is a hook that enables updating state without blocking the UI, a part of React 18's concurrency mode. It can be used to avoid the app from freezing during slow navigations, display feedback when waiting for a page to load, or track the state of a server action. Is this playing? Yeah, OK. Server actions are defined with useServer and tells the framework, like Next.js, to generate a post endpoint to a function. This allows us to call it from any component, for example, a client component. It simplifies the communication across the server boundary while providing type safety with RPC. This feature has been in Next.js for a while already and became stable with Next version 14. The new form element is React's extension of the native HTML form, building on top of its existing methods. This extension lets you create interactive controls for submitting information, as well as letting the action property call a function, like a server action. The server action passed will automatically be called as an HTTP post, be wrapped in a transition, and contain a hidden form data element with the values of the form. UseFormStatus is a hook that provides information about the last form submission. It must be used inside a form component and can be used, for example, to disable a button or display inputted data while a form is submitting. It enables progressive enhancement because without JavaScript, the button will still work fine, but not display any feedback. UseFormState is a hook that allows you to update state based on the result of a form action. It also supports progressive enhancement by allowing the server's response to be shown without JavaScript before hydration has completed. It can be used, for example, to display error messages or other information from the backend. Lastly, UseOptimistic is a hook that lets you optimistically update UI while a background operation completes. It lets you keep the UI snappy by providing instant feedback to interactions. It can be used with server action and form submissions, but also with other potentially slow operations, such as filtering based on route params. This hook stands out because of its ability to seamlessly merge the client and server state as the server finishes its update. With that in mind, let's move on to the demo. OK. I hope you can see this. And for the ones in the back, you can also open the live stream if you want to keep track of what's happening here. So the starting point is actually a Next.js app that I've built as a clone of an old Remix tutorial. It doesn't do that much. You can get a random joke, and you can click through existing ones. And then I have a button to go to a new page, which is where we're going to be starting today. Excuse me. This is not supposed to look like that. I think this is fine. That's OK. So we're going to be working from the new joke form. And this is Next.js 14. And it's using Prisma to communicate with the database. And I'm just going to show you the joke list so you see what it looks like. So I'm using the server what can you say, the functionality of server components to await a database call here for the data. So we're going to be needing a form. And it should contain some labels. For example, name with the name. And another one, which can be the content of the joke. And let's just, yeah, we can use this. And then I'm going to rename this to add. And actually, I'm going to be using the style button I have here. And just close this. So now we have a form, but it doesn't do anything. So we're going to be using React's extension of the form component. I think this is fake. To call a server action. Now this will be wrapped in a transition and will let us just directly call a function without using HTTP post as a property here. So we're going to make this server action. And it has to be a server action, so we're going to use useServer here. And it will take in the form data from the form, which is type form data. So this means that every field here is going to be passed with its value to the server action. Just import this right away. And what we'll do with this is just use Prisma to create a joke. And the data will be the name as the form data get to get the field with the name. And then also the content. And close this. And then we have to tell Next.js that we will be adding something, and it has to revalidate the data afterwards. So we're going to call a revalidate path. And as you can see, I've just typed these as strings. You really shouldn't do that because this is an untrusted input, but we're going to fix that later. But let's see if this works. So as you can see, just by doing that, I have now successfully communicated with my database and submitted a joke. But let's say that this create joke is actually kind of slow, which is realistic, because this is just a local database here. And we don't actually know how long this takes. Sorry, this is the same one. But I don't get any feedback that I did click the button here. So what I'm going to do is just copy this code here and make a new component. I'm just going to call it add button. Oops. Let's see. And I'm going to paste the button code here. And we're going to be using one of those hooks that I mentioned, the use form status. And this will return to us a lot of things, but we're just going to use the pending now. And we can use this to, first of all, disable the button if the form action is pending. And then we can display some other text here. And import this. And since we're using the use form status, we now have to make this a client component, because this is a JavaScript requiring feature. And I messed something up. Let's just find out what. Should be a bracket here. And this, yep. And then we're going to use this instead of the button we're already using. And now, since this component exists inside the form element, it will see the status of the action that this form is calling. So as you can see, it's now receiving the status and disabling the button. So that's really good. But this is not ideal, because I'm just typing these as strings. And we should check that it's actually valid data and maybe set some requirements for what kind of jokes should be submitted. So I'm going to be using Zod, which is a schema validator. And I'm going to say that the content has to be a string of a couple of 5 characters. Name must be string of minimum 2. And they both have their corresponding error message. And I'm going to use this to validate my data. So it's going to give me a result, the schema. And save parse is just not going to throw an error, but return to me a result. And I'm going to put this here. And then I don't have to use these typings here. And if the result, if it failed to parse, I can, for example, just console log for now, validation error, and return. And if it is a success, I can safely use the parsing result and put it in my database. So let's see what happens when this is not valid, which it isn't because it's only 3. It's going to just return and log validation error. So that's good, but the user doesn't know what has happened or why the joke didn't submit. So what I'm going to do is, instead of console logging, I'm going to return some state. We're going to put a success flag, false, a message, and I'm just going to say validation error. And then the errors, I'm going to be using the result, the errors from the result, and then the per field errors from the Zod result. And then I want to also just add a try catch here, because what if something happens in the database? And then we can, let's see if this is OK. We don't need an error. We just need to say database error. And finally, if everything is fine, I'm going to just return a success flag, like this. And now we need to get this to the user. So we're going to use the use form state. And it will take in an action to submit, a server action to call on submit, and an initial state. And it will return to us the state and an action to replace here in our form. And this type is just, I just got this from Zod. And we will use the state to make some error messages. So a span of a class name text red so that we can see it, so it looks like an error. And I'm going to use the errors, the field errors, and the name from the field errors, which is just the error that's corresponding to this field. and put this also for the content. And we're having some errors here because this is also requiring JavaScript because it's another hook, so we have to make this a client component. And still, we have some TypeScript errors because when you call useFormState like this, you also receive the initial state in the function that's being called. I'm not going to, or sorry, the previous state. So I'm just going to leave this here, but I'm not going to be using that now. And I have a shortcut like this. And now we don't have any errors, and let's see what happens. Yeah, my text read. Red text. I don't know what I was doing here. Text read, text read. Let's try it again. So as you can see, I'm getting this error from the server to the client using the useFormState. And then when I submit something that's OK, I would like to also return some extra feedback to the user and clear the form. So I'm going to be using an effect for this. And I need a ref to the form. And I'm going to attach this to the form. And if the state is a success, it's going to reset the form. And we know that we don't have to do anything on the validation error, but we can also do something on the database error. State.message is database error. We can do a error toast message, for example, and just say failed to create joke. And we can also do a toast on success. And import this, and add the dependency array, and import this. And let's see if it works. So if it's successful, the form will reset, and we get a toast that the joke has been added. So that's good, but I'm getting a lot of jokes here, and I really don't need all these. So I'm going to be implementing a delete functionality, also using a form. So let's head over to the joke page, where I'm also I have just a database call that's getting a joke based on joke ID, and then this is from the params. So I want to have a delete button here. And I just made something to start with. And this is a button that you already know what does, pretty much. It's the same as the add. It's useFormStatus, and then disabled, etc. And we're going to put this in a form, because the onSubmit is not going to be, the onClick is not progressively enhanced. So I'm going to wrap this in a form and say action is delete joke. And this server action just deletes based on a joke ID and revalidates the path and redirects to the main page. But I have a problem, and that is that this action, this server action requires a joke ID, and I don't have any form fields inside here. And I could make a hidden field, but I don't really want to make code for that, so I'm going to use something else. I'm going to make a new function and called delete joke, which is the server action .bind, which is going to bind initial arguments to this function as a copy of this one, and replace this. And then I will be able to pass the params joke ID to the server action. And let's see if it works. It works. Now, I also want to favorite some of these, because maybe some of them are funnier than the other ones. So I'm going to add a favorite here. Let's see. And it takes in a joke, so I'm going to show you this component. It's also pretty much the same as the delete functionality. It uses a bind to get a function favorite joke by ID, which is based on the joke, which takes in the joke ID and the favorite, so that this now contains both of those arguments. And it displays a star if it's favorited, etc., depending on the result of the status of the joke. And this works, but it's quite slow. And I don't really want to be displaying any loading state here. I just want it to be instant. So what I'm going to do is use the use optimistic. And it takes in the state to show when no action is pending. We're going to use the truth from the server here. And it also takes in an update function, which will take in the previous state and the optimistic item. But this is just a Boolean, so I don't need to do anything here. But if it's a list, you can do like, spread, whatever. So I'm just going to leave it like this. And it will return the optimistic favorite. And it will return the function to trigger this optimistic update. So let's replace this favorite property here, which is depending on the server's update, with the optimistic favorite. And let's also make a new trigger here, an onSubmit, because this onSubmit requires JavaScript, and I just want to also progressively enhance it. So I'm just going to leave the action and make a copy, kind of, where I'm going to prevent the default form behavior and set the optimistic favorite to the opposite of the current value. And then I'm going to await the actual function to update this, which is the favorite joke by ID, which is the same as is being called on the action. And when I call server actions outside of action, that means there's no transition to keep the app responsive. So I'm going to also wrap it here, because that's kind of best practice when you're using server actions outside of the action property. So you know this. You're going to get is pending and start transition. Oops. From use transition. And I'm going to wrap this in a transition. And then this can also be async, good thing. And then if I needed to use this as pending for anything, I could, but I don't, so I'm just going to not use that. And what will happen now is when I click this, it's going to respond instantly. And I don't have to wait to see what the server is returning to get feedback here. So let's just do like a final demo here and do a disable JavaScript first, just to see that it's all working, even without JavaScript. So now I'm getting the full page reload here because there's no client-side navigation. And I can try to add jokes. And I can get errors without JavaScript. And I can submit jokes and delete them again. I just don't get any feedback on this button that it's triggered. And I can also favorite them. And then with the progressively enhanced experience, we can add, get error messages and the adding, and get a toast and clear the form. Delete with feedback, and then get the optimistic favorite here. That's pretty much it for the demo. Yep. So these React features are still evolving, and they're not the answer to everything, but they allow us to code in Next.js with React in a progressively enhanced way without sacrificing interactivity, which previously hasn't been possible. Also, the client-side way is not obsolete. It all depends on what the goal of your application is. You might still want your React hook form, but luckily now it will be easier because you can use server actions. And the React team is expecting new abstractions to be built on top of this to simplify your use of them. So it will be very exciting to see how that kind of develops. And actually, submitting forms with actions is not a new concept in the meta framework world. Remix has been building on the principle of progressive enhancement ever since they released the framework and enabled it with their loaders, action, and focus on web standards. SvelteKit and Noxt also have somewhat the same thing. But of course, the frameworks each have different implementations, features, and developer experience. So the good thing is what we've been learning is applicable outside Next.js as well. However, I would say that the Next.js way using server actions stands out because they separate the action from the route, allowing more versatility and simplifying cases such as multiple forms in one route. Hopefully, we will hear more about the Remix way in the talk coming up later today and see how they compare. that wraps up the talk. So here's the code for the demo app, including the code I was just writing. And the main branch of the repo contains more examples of different RC things, such as suspense, global state, React hook forms, React query, and other things if you're interested. As for references, most of the stuff I've shown can be found on either the React docs or the Next.js docs, where the React docs contain more in-depth explanations. So please do not hesitate to come and chat with me if you see me at the conference later. I really love to talk about this stuff, or ask questions or Discord, or message me on Twitter. And thank you again, React Paris.